Right, so the BBC have had an absolute car crash, falling over itself once more to dishonestly present the news, it would appear, because their claims of errors are once again falling on deaf ears to those people who are more than familiar with how they choose to frame narratives and influence how people think in the way that they present the news. As we know, hostages are being released by both Israel and Hamas as we go into the final day of the 4-day ceasefire. Hope that it'll be extended, looking a little bit ropey, maybe, given the conduct of Israel not sticking to the ceasefire agreement in multiple examples, as stated in my earlier video. And yesterday I covered what the Israeli government is looking to do to one of its own media outlets who are reporting honestly, showing the BBC up not only for how it covers the same news concerning hostage releases and the conduct of Israel and Hamas and the impact on innocent Gazans, but doubly so since it is standing up to its own government over that, something the BBC appears utterly incapable of. But given the Tories have stuffed it full of their own, that should come as a little surprise. I suppose the dishonesty of the BBC being run by Tories in Tory interests and following a Tory news narrative therefore shouldn't surprise us at all, but equally it shouldn't surprise them when we see it and it gets called out to embarrassing effect on their part. Right, so what have the BBC done this time, Damo? Well, we're talking Israeli hostage releases here. Those Palestinians being released are reporting that they have not been treated well, been abused, all things that Israel really don't want the world to hear. And certainly our own pro-Israel Tory government don't want us hearing either. So the BBC, required to cover this story as they are, covered it in the way they so often do, by setting a narrative, presenting the story in a certain light, a certain way, so as to influence how we are viewing the conflict, not necessarily just reporting the news as it actually is. They've got away with it for years, but in this era of social media, it doesn't cut through anymore because we can get our news from so many different sources, more reliable sources, impartial, foreign-based sources even sources located in the same part of the world. And when they're saying different, it raises questions as to who to believe. And with the BBC's reputation for newsworthiness as it stands these days, it's not difficult to see why more and more people are turning it off, especially in case of Israel and the Palestine crisis. Sources like Israel-based Haaretz or Qatar-based Al Jazeera have proven vastly more reliable. But the latest example of BBC shamelessness came in the wake of an interview with a freed Palestinian hostage called Sarah al-Suwaisa. She does not speak English, therefore a translation was required, and this was subtitled. And this is where the BBC came a cropper, because this is what she said, according to the BBC translation. The Israelis came at 10 in the morning and told us there was a deal. We were suffering from difficult circumstances and tear gas was fired at us. We were wearing head covers all the time. The situation was humiliating and included psychological torture. In addition to cutting off the electricity for the prisoners, we were suffering from the cold without electricity, and no one helped us. Only Hamas cared. Those who felt our suffering, I thank them very much, and we love them very much. So a mistreated hostage who happens to also be a very big fan of Hamas, it would appear. She said they felt her suffering. Only they cared. She thanked them and said that she loves them. So no fewer than 4 instances of positive expression towards Hamas from this lady then. Well, that is if you believe the BBC translation, because they of course weren't the only people to translate what she said, because the organisation Respond Crisis Translation also did so. And this is all these guys do. They are a non-profit that provide translation services globally to help migrants, refugees, anywhere there's a language barrier to accessing safety and dignity, which can be the difference ultimately between people being able to access their basic human rights that they are entitled to or not. So good translation is so important, it is key. And they have no fewer than 58 Arabic translators working for them, according to their website. I'd imagine they know their onions here then. This is what they said that Sarah al-Suwaisa said. The Israeli occupation forces came at 10 a.m. telling us there would be a deal, and then they imprisoned us. They've imprisoned us for a month. They are firing tear gas at us. We female prisoners are living under constant humiliation. We keep veiled 24/7. Nobody knows anyone. Prisoners with mental health issues are being treated mercilessly in the same way as healthy prisoners, being tortured and humiliated, leading to their collapse. Nobody helps or supports anyone. They've imprisoned us for a month. As winter came, they cut off the electricity. We almost died from the cold weather. They sprayed us with pepper spray and left us to die in the prison. You'll notice in their translation there isn't a single mention of Hamas, let alone 4 gushing responses about them. The BBC also heavily downplayed their mistreatment and also mental health. There are far too many errors for this to be an honest mistake, in my opinion. This was deliberate misrepresentation, because the average BBC viewer who cannot understand Arabic will just take the subtitles at face value. This shows you can't do that. Response Crisis Translation had plenty more to say on what they thought of the BBC's translation, though. In a thread on Twitter, their official account said, "A released Palestinian prisoner says in Arabic that Israel held them in the cold without electricity, sprayed us with pepper spray and left us to die. She never mentioned Hamas or a word like it. Yet the BBC translated to, 'No one helped us, only Hamas cared, we love them very much.' This egregious mistranslation is not just a language error, it is a racist fabrication that fans the flames of the war. The BBC must immediately correct this dangerous error and explain how it came to be. Mistranslations such as these, intentional or not, are exacerbating the ongoing genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. These wild mistranslations and other forms of rampant language violence are why Respond is partnering with journalists to fill language gaps in coverage of the Gaza genocide." Perhaps the BBC should partner with them too to get their own translations right, but given how many mistakes you can find here, it really doesn't strike me as their legitimate intent, and I think Respond are absolutely right to call out mistranslations such as these as egregious and racist. Having been caught out, though, the BBC has trotted out a correction. At time of writing, there's still no official apology, though. What they did do was pull the video saying their reason for it had been an error in the editing process, so the BBC won't even admit to its translation having been utter bullshit then. Well, the story goes even deeper. You see, the interview with Sarah al-Suwaisa was actually a little bit longer originally, and in the slightly longer footage, it's 42 seconds long instead of the original 35 seconds, al-Suwaisa did say she was proud of Hamas. So the BBC editing error, as they call it, could have been a fully translated interview. But by shortening the clip by a few seconds, they cut the bit off where she actually mentioned Hamas. Yet, they intentionally, clearly, had to have done, left that bit of the subtitles in, or rather covered up the bits mentioning some of the details of mistreatment in order to shoehorn that subtitle in. That still seems very, very deliberate to me. So for anyone horrified that her admission is true at the end of the day, I think it's a case of you need to appreciate the fact she doesn't speak for all Gazans for a start. Most are sick of Hamas rule, but equally they're under occupation. They're resisting. And it's taken an atrocity such as that which Hamas committed, though it certainly appears more deaths on October 7th were due to Israeli gunships, as we've discovered since, to get the world to notice. We can't look away again now. This has to be resolved now that we're looking again. But equally, we can't allow ourselves to become victims of a westernised misinformation campaign, courtesy of supposed news outlets that blatantly cannot be trusted. The BBC has shamed itself once more, and with no apology still, continues to do so. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content up daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Israel is set to sanction one of their own newspapers. Even talk of shutting it down completely is circulated for telling the world, if they care to listen, exactly what Israel are doing, considering it their patriotic duty to do so. Netanyahu's goons thinking otherwise, so is treatment like this what the BBC is so afraid of at the Tories' hands? Perhaps they should focus on doing what is right for us, the people who actually fund them, and not for them, as Haaretz appear to be very much doing. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.